The French tanker La Somme was conducting routine patrol work in the Indian Ocean in late 2009 as part of the European effort to appease piracy in the region. Armed to the teeth and with a complement of 162 sailors, the imposing flagship had nothing to fear in the disputed waters off the African Horn. And yet, one fateful evening, the unthinkable happened. Two tiny motorized boats, manned by a handful of troublemakers, dared to open fire on the mighty French tanker. Swiftly, the crew of La Somme put the pirates to shame and promptly resumed their operations. While anyone would assume the pirates would have learned not to mess with the warship, as documented in a series of pictures posted online, in 2010, La Somme was assaulted once more. As one of the world's busiest maritime trade routes, the waters off Somalia are not strangers to international frictions. But the situation escalated around the year 2000 when the area became infested by pirates. For decades, the country was in a state of lawlessness, torn apart by factional fighting and political instability. But it was the pirates that captured the world's attention with their brazen attacks on ships that passed through their territory. These pirates operate from several ports along the Indian Ocean and Gulf of Aden coasts, striking fear in the hearts of sailors and shipping companies alike. The situation became so dire that the world's naval powers had to deploy dozens of warships to patrol the waters off Somalia in an effort to curb the attacks. Despite these efforts, the pirates not only continued to strike, but actually increased their frequency and audacity. In 2008 alone, there were 111 attacks, although only 42 of them led to successful hijackings. And the numbers continued to climb. In January and February 2009, the rate of attacks was approximately 10 times higher than during the same period the previous year. By March, there were almost daily attacks, amounting to 79 events before April ended. But it wasn't just the sheer volume of attacks that was alarming. The pirates also expanded their range, striking as far south as the coast of Kenya in the Indian Ocean. Towards the end of the year, a couple of skiffs attempted what first seemed to be a straightforward attack on a cargo ship. By the time they realized it wasn't a commercial ship, but rather the French Navy's flagship, La Somme, and tried to escape, it was too late. La Somme is the fifth and final ship of the Durance class of French replenishment tankers built in the late 1980s. She entered service in 1990 for the primary role of fleet tanker, but she was also configured as a flagship, thus enabling her to accommodate an entire general staff and supervise naval operations as a command ship. The 7,900-ton ship is armed by a Bofors 40mm L-60 anti-aircraft gun in a single gun turret, 4 12.7mm M2 Browning machine guns, and 3 launchers for Sinbad Mistral surface-to-air missiles. Additionally, La Somme has a flight deck for Aerospatiale Alouette 3 and Westland Lynx helicopters, as well as some larger types. As for her complement, it includes 162 crew members, but she is capable of accommodating 250 personnel. After entering service, La Somme was assigned to the Indian Ocean as the flagship of the French naval forces and sent to the Horn of Africa to conduct patrol and anti-piracy missions. One of her first missions included liberating the yacht Le Ponant from Somali pirates. Later on, she joined Operation Atalanta, an initiative by the European Union to combat the rampant piracy in the Gulf of Aden and other areas, as the command vessel for the French forces. But much to everyone's surprise, La Somme didn't have to chase after the pirates. The pirates were coming to her. It was dark on October 6, 2009, when the French Navy's flagship, on its way to resupply fuel to frigates patrolling shipping lanes, sailing about 460 kilometers off the Somali coast, suddenly found herself under attack. 2 lightweight skiffs, manned by pirates armed with Kalashnikovs, opened fire on the command ship and fuel tanker, mistaking it for a commercial vessel. Obviously, and in hindsight laughably, the crew of La Somme were more than well prepared for such a risible assault. They fended off the pirates in a blink. In the words of Admiral Christophe Prezuc, quote, "They rapidly realized that La Somme was not behaving like a commercial ship. She was not trying to run away, but on the contrary, La Somme was heading towards the pirates. And so at that time, the pirates turned away and tried to escape." But French forces were hot on their trail, pursuing them for an hour until they caught one of the skiffs. On board, they found 5 pirates, but no weapons, water, or food. It seemed the pirates had thrown everything overboard in an effort to evade capture. Still, it was useless. Just like the U.S. Maritime Administration had warned, the end of the monsoon season was likely to bring an increase in piracy off Somalia. Pirates often operate in small fiberglass skiffs towed out to sea by captured fishing vessels. Calmer waters facilitate their mischief and allow them to hijack freighters, trawlers, private yachts, and even cruise vessels every now and then. The end of 2009 was a time when shipping companies had to be more vigilant than ever. But as ridiculous as it may seem, it was not the last time the Somme would be attacked by pirates. On April 20th, 2010, another group of troublemakers assaulted the warship with 8 rounds from automatic weapons, but missed. Early that morning, the suspects engaged the flagship off the Somalian coast in 2 skiffs, once again deceived by her profile. And once again, their misdeeds didn't end well for the pirates, as documented in photographs from the scene. The crew on La Somme did not take long to fire 3 warning shots and then set out to capture the criminals. In the pursuit, the flagship discovered what appeared to be a mothership, loaded with stocks of fuel and 2 suspected pirates on board. Only then did the pirates understand their grave mistake. In haste, the 2 boats fled in 2 different directions, trying to mislead the warship, but their efforts were futile. As seen in the pictures, the 2 suspects were taken into custody, and another 4 were captured from one of the skiffs after the chase. Inside the boat, weapons and grappling hooks to climb aboard the assaulted vessels were confiscated by La Somme. While La Somme would sail into the waters off Somalia on a regular basis in her mission to refuel vessels involved in Operation Atalanta, her entire nation played a critical role in the overall outcome of the campaign. France would aggressively pursue pirates and deliver them to justice. The French Navy was determined to crack down on these criminals, with 15 suspects facing prosecution in Paris by the end of 2010 for allegedly seizing boats belonging to French nationals. While the flagship awaited orders on what to do with the 6 suspects they had just captured, the Navy was on high alert, apprehending a record-breaking 35 pirates in just 3 days the previous month. Admittedly, the refueling vessel has a less aggressive aspect than a frigate, and notably, the attacks happened in the middle of the night, when the aggressors could easily mistake her for a commercial or another civilian vessel. Still, the irony remains. The British destroyer HMS Sheffield was sent to help in retaking the Falklands from the Argentines in 1982, but during its mission, it was exposed to more than submarine attacks. The sinking of the Argentinian General Belgrano on May 2nd took the lives of 323 Argentinian men, and the South Americans were enraged. 2 Super Étendard aircraft then took off from southern Argentina and launched 2 missiles aimed at HMS Sheffield. Lieutenant Steve Iacovu, on board the ship, later described in an interview, quote, "It really does amaze me now, when I come to think of it, that we watched it almost to the point of impact, when we quickly huddled together and dropped to the floor." Argentinian military director General Leopoldo Galtieri sought to strengthen his regime's withering popularity, appealing to patriotism. It was also vital to divert the attention away from Argentina's critical economic crisis. A centuries-old disagreement over the Falkland Islands with Great Britain was then resurrected to stir the people's spirits. The Falkland Islands are a mere 480 kilometers away from the South American coast and 12,000 kilometers from the British mainland. On April 2nd, 1982, Argentine forces invaded the British-ruled territory. The small and unprepared English forces, consisting of 80 Royal Marines, were severely outnumbered and swiftly surrendered. Argentina was quick to claim the islands, assuming that the British would not care to retaliate. But they were wrong. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, known as the Iron Lady, would not let the invasion go unnoticed and leave the islands at the mercy of their opponents. She then put together a task force of 6,000 troops and 30 warships and ordered the immediate retrieval of the stolen lands. HMS Sheffield was a British Type 42 guided missile destroyer. It was part of Task Force 317, which was sent to retrieve the Falkland Islands during the 10-week confrontation with Argentina. The vessel was launched by Queen Elizabeth II in 1971. It had significant design issues involving its radar and lacked an electronic countermeasures jammer. In January 1982, Captain James Salt took command of the ship, although his recent experience had been on board submarines. Meanwhile, his second-in-command had been an anti-submarine helicopter observer. They had no relevant experience in surface ships or air defense. As a response to the Argentinian invasion in its southern hemisphere territories, the British sent HMS Sheffield to retake the islands on April 2, 1982. The ship was marked with a black vertical line on its side, from the funnel to the waterline, to avoid being mistaken for the Argentine Hercules or Santissima Trinidad. HMS Sheffield departed on the 10th and arrived on Ascension Island on the 14th, where it joined Task Force 317. An exclusion zone was established around the islands, and any Argentine vessel passing through would be downed. The total exclusion zone operation around the Falklands then commenced on May 1st. British policy mandated Royal Navy vessels to immediately turn towards the threat and fire chaff if there was any suspicion of a missile attack. This protocol went under the code word handbrake. However, a submarine threat was regarded as more imminent than airstrikes. On May 2nd, the Royal Navy's HMS Conqueror submarine sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano with over 300 crew members. The incident happened outside the edge of the exclusion zone and became highly controversial. From that day on, the Argentinians kept their ships at anchor and resorted to their Navy aircraft to perform airstrikes against the enemy. Their fleet was outdated, but the sheer number of aircraft posed a significant threat to the Royal Navy. Still, Captain Salt had HMS Sheffield change course every 90 seconds to divert potential underwater attacks. The Argentine Naval Aviation Lockheed SP-2H Neptune patrol aircraft first detected HMS Sheffield at 7:50 a.m. on May 4th. Its position was subsequently verified at 8:14 and 8:43. Two Super Étendards armed with AM-38 Exocet missiles took off from Rio Grande Naval Air Base at 9:45 a.m. and met the Argentine Air Force Hercules tanker to refuel 15 minutes later. The Super Étendards were piloted by Commander Augusto Beda-Caratz and Lieutenant Armando Mayora. For 2 weeks, the Argentines had practiced attack maneuvers against their own Type 42 destroyers like Sheffield. They were aware of the specifics of the radar horizon, detection distances, and reaction times, and optimized the Exocet missiles for a successful launch. The pilots also employed what is known colloquially as pecking the lobes, a technique that probes the side lobes of an emitting radar and avoids being detected by the main lobe. By 10:35 a.m., a low-flying Neptune had located one large and two medium-sized targets and updated their positions accordingly. Once verified, the coordinates were loaded, and the missiles launched at 11:04 a.m. from a distance of around 20 or 30 miles. Meanwhile, Sheffield's crew performed defense watches, but had been having trouble distinguishing Mirage and Super Étendard aircraft due to proper radar jamming. Moreover, intelligence briefings identifying potential Exocet attacks were dismissed as false alarms. A supporting ship, HMS Glasgow, had detected aircraft at only 40 nautical miles. Glasgow's officials ordered the crew to take action stations and communicated the handbrake codeword operation. But Sheffield did not receive the warning. It wasn't until lookouts aboard Sheffield made out smoke in the distance that they realized they were under attack. Surprisingly, Sheffield did not take any countermeasures. There weren't any orders to fire chaff, take action stations, or perform any evasive maneuver. The captain was resting in his cabin at the time, and the anti-air warfare officer was chatting with the stewards. Of the two Exocets fired by the Argentine aircraft, one hit Sheffield on the starboard at deck level 2, breaching the forward auxiliary machinery room and forward engine room. The firefighting response system was heavily damaged, and the ship was consumed by flames. Another accompanying ship, HMS Coventry, was exchanging communications with Sheffield at the moment of the attack. An unidentified message suddenly came through, quote, "Sheffield is hit." Escorts Arrow and Yarmouth were dispatched to aid the destroyer. They tried to fight the fire, but it was of little use. The crew on board Sheffield struggled to save the ship for almost 4 hours until the captain ordered everyone to abandon it. There was a possibility that the fires would ignite the ammunition and expose the supporting vessels to air attacks. Everyone on board was evacuated, either on the escorts or helicopters. 20 men lost their lives, and only one body was recovered and buried on English soil. The vessel was towed to South Georgia, but the high waters filled the ship through the starboard hull. It eventually sank on the 6th day, just on the edge of the total exclusion zone. In 2017, a complete report of the event was published. New information revealed multiple issues that rendered the ship utterly unprepared for such an attack. Furthermore, 2 officers were found negligent, but according to The Guardian, quote, escaped courts-martial and did not face disciplinary action, apparently in order to avoid undermining the euphoria that gripped much of the UK at the end of the war. As seafood demand grows at an alarming rate, Chinese vessels have been attempting to illegally fish in other countries' protected waters, sometimes at a very high cost. In March 2016, the Argentine Naval Prefecture embarked on a high-seas chase to pursue the Luyanyanyu 10. The illegal fishing vessel was attempting to steal tons of fish from Argentina's exclusive economic zone. This footage, released a day after the pursuit, shows the Argentinian Navy's attempts to capture the Chinese ship, before they had no other choice but to sink it when their own safety was at risk. On the morning of March 14, 2016, Argentinian Coast Guard ship Derbez spotted a large red and white fishing boat on the ocean near Port Madryn, a fishing city of about 70,000 people in the province of Chubut in the Patagonia region. Port Madryn is part of Argentina's Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. It's a designated area set aside by a 1982 United Nations treaty. Under the agreement, states have special rights regarding the exploration and use of their marine resources, including flora and fauna. And EEZ stretches out up to 200 nautical miles from the coast. The Derbez crewmen knew immediately what the ship was doing. Incognito Chinese fishing boats carry out illegal fishing all over the world, as their country doesn't have enough supply for its rising seafood demand. Both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts have been affected, with Peru and Argentina being the countries that have taken the brunt of Chinese fishing. After recognizing the Luyanyanyu 10 as an illegal fishing trawler, the Argentinian Navy tried to contact them through the radio in both English and Spanish to no avail. A chase that was caught on camera soon began. The Argentinians had to act fast before the vessel escaped with what they assumed were tons of seafood. The Derbez attempted numerous audio and visual signals to the Chinese vessel. When they noticed the foreign ship turned off its lights and began fleeing towards international waters, the Argentinian Navy knew it was time to resort to more drastic measures. They fired several warning shots directed at the trawler, which in response turned toward its pursuer and repeatedly attempted to ram into them. The Navy was in danger of losing its own ship. The Argentinian vessel began firing directly at the Chinese fishing boat, which started to sink after its hull began taking on water. The Chinese crew had no option but to abandon the ship. 4 of the crew members, including the captain, can be seen being pulled to safety by the Derbez crew. The remaining crew of the massive ship was able to board 2 other Chinese vessels, which had arrived at the confrontational scene. No injuries were reported from either side. The chase lasted several hours, and this footage shows the end result, a capsized vessel, ready to sink to the bottom of the ocean. The Luyanyanyu 10 had a long track record of illegal fishing incidents all over the world. It's owned by Shandong Yantai Marine Fisheries Company, a subsidiary of the China National Fisheries Corporation, a gigantic state-owned firm owned by the China Agricultural Development Group, part of the Chinese government. Assisted by China's massive bureaucratic administration and an interconnected network of embassies, the China National Fisheries Corporation's vessels have licenses to fish in several other countries, but not in designated EEZ zones. The Luyanyanyu 10 is far from the first vessel involved in an incident like this in an Argentinian port. A few weeks before the Luyanyanyu 10 incident, another Chinese ship was caught in illegal squid fishing. The vessel, named Huali 8, was detected on February 29th, and it also ignored all communication from the Argentine Coast Guard. The ship subsequently attempted to flee for 4 days, first to Uruguayan waters, then returning to Argentine seas, and finally escaping into international waters on March 3rd. In 2013, authorities caught an illegal Chinese vessel that carried 180 tons of fresh squid as it tried to escape Port Madryn. Authorities, experts, and even non-profit organizations such as Oceana agree that the rise in demand for seafood and increased competition over crumbling stocks could set up new worldwide conflicts. Many of them have explicitly pointed to China, as their fishing stocks have shrunk dramatically in the last decade. As Beijing expanded its distant ocean fishing fleet, several of the vessels have been involved in disputes such as the conflict in Argentina. Though met with force and determination from the Argentinian Navy, the sailors were still relatively safe from any real danger. On the other hand, Indonesia has even gone as far as blowing up Chinese boats after catching them in illegal fishing. Its government has clearly stated, quote, "What the Chinese boats are doing is not fishing. It is transnational organized crime." On May 8, 2024, the calm waters off the coast of northern Luzon witnessed a massive display of military might. Cameras captured the moment BRP Lake Caliraya, a Chinese-made Philippine Navy tanker, was used as target practice in a military exercise. In a joint venture with Philippine, American, and Australian forces, witnessed by a large audience back on land, the ship endured a relentless barrage, with missiles, bombs, and rockets striking her with precision until smoke covered her and she began to sink. The deliberate sinking, which happened in the South China Sea, only 125 miles away from Taiwan, emphasized the critical importance of military preparedness amidst rising tensions in the region, and sent a powerful message to anyone who dares challenge the archipelago's sovereignty. In the spring of 2024, nearly 17,000 troops from the Philippines and the United States, along with hundreds of Australian troops and military observers from more than a dozen countries, kicked off Balikatan, Tagalog for Shoulder to Shoulder, a joint combat training exercise. For 3 weeks, Filipino, American, Australian, and French service members trained close together in drills regarding maritime security, amphibious operations, combined arms, aviation, and cyberspace. More than ever, the 2024 exercises emphasized quality over quantity, focusing on coordination from planning to execution. According to the Philippine military, territorial protection was a key point this year. While Washington and Manila say the drills are not directed at any country, the most extensive exercises were held in two of the most sensitive spots in the decades-long regional geopolitical rivalry between China and the West, the famously disputed South China Sea and the Bashi Channel. China considers Taiwan a part of its territory to be annexed by force if necessary, and as such, all critical waterways between the two nations have been closely watched and guarded by Chinese and American troops for years. 2024 marks the first year the combat exercises were staged near the fiercely contested Spratly Islands area, claimed in whole or in part by several countries. There was also another first, the deliberate sinking of a Chinese-made naval asset of the Philippine Navy. On May 8th, in the final days of the 3-week event, for a mock scenario of a foreign invasion of the Philippine archipelago, dozens of military officials and diplomats from several countries gathered at Loag City, off the eastern coast of northern Luzon in the waters of the West Philippine Sea. This area, part of the South China Sea, falls within the exclusive economic zone claimed by Manila. Nearly 10 miles away from the coast, the United States, Filipino, and Australian military forces in the ocean prepared to integrate land, sea, and air operations with the ultimate goal of sinking BRP Lake Caliraya. The target ship was once a tiny replenishable tanker of a now defunct company that was donated to the Philippine Navy in 2014, where she served until she was decommissioned in 2020 due to mechanical and electrical issues. The assault began with Philippine and U.S. platforms firing several types of powerful ordnance, followed by anti-ship missiles launched by the flagship of the Philippine Navy, BRP Jose Rizal, becoming the very first time the frigate launched a weapon of the type. With the goal of striking it as much as possible to test technologies and coordinate efforts, the mock target was also struck by Spike NLOS missile, GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munitions, and 2.75-inch advanced rockets. This was followed by several Philippine Air Force FA-50 Golden Eagle fighter jets and American F-16 Fighting Falcon supersonic multi-role fighter aircraft dropping bombs. After an hour of combat readiness drills, a black cloud of smoke started to billow from the stern of the ship. and through the monitor watched by all foreign military guests and journalists, the ship began to sink. This showdown became the culmination of this year's largest ever military exercise between the two allies. Military spokesperson Colonel Francel Margaret Padilla defended their choice of target for the sinking exercise, saying, quote, "It's purely coincidental, and it's really not directed towards the source of such a vessel." However, the SINKEX operation came a little over a week after the latest Chinese and Philippine confrontations. For years, China has accused the Philippines of setting off hostilities in the disputed waters by encroaching in what the nation believes are its offshore territories, demarcated by 10 dashes on a map. The Philippines counters that it has the right to defend its sovereignty and territorial interests, repeatedly citing a 2016 international arbitration ruling based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea that invalidated China's extensive claims over the South China Sea on historical grounds. China has consistently rejected the ruling and continues to defy it. Based on their beliefs, in the past few years, China has been taking bigger and bigger actions in order to expel every single Philippine Coast Guard and other vessel from those areas, with small skirmishes between Beijing and Manila all over the area, particularly flaring up since 2023. Still, it all came to a head on April 24, 2024, when a Philippine Coast Guard ship and an accompanying fisheries vessel patrolling the waters off Scarborough Shoal were confronted by the Chinese Coast Guard. 4 ships, backed by 6 suspected militia vessels, then executed dangerous blocking maneuvers, including the use of a water cannon against the fisheries vessels and a Philippine Coast Guard ship. Philippine officials stated, quote, "China's latest illegal and irresponsible behavior highlights its egregious disregard for the Philippines' lawful exercise of its rights and entitlements in our own exclusive economic zone." Meanwhile, to China, the action was nothing more than a necessary measure. The rising frequency of encounters between the Philippines and China in this increasingly tense territorial conflict has sparked international fears that could lead to an armed confrontation that could put China and the United States on a collision course. That's because while America does not claim the South China Sea, the nation is obligated to defend the Philippines, thanks to a decades-long treaty. The sinking of a tanker after China's increasingly aggressive actions in disputed territories in Asia is the latest indication of the strong relationship between the United States and the Philippines, which solidified with a mutual defense treaty signed on August 30, 1951. The document has 8 articles and requires both nations to support each other if another party attacks the Philippines or the United States. In February 2023, President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. greenlit a wider U.S. military presence in the Philippines, allowing American forces to establish staging grounds and surveillance posts in the northern Philippines, across the channel from Taiwan. This decision is a wild contrast to his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, who worried that a larger American military footprint would only antagonize Beijing. Regarding the Manila-Washington relationship, Philippine ambassador to Washington, Jose Romualdez, stated, quote, "An alliance is very important to show China that you may have all the ships that you have, but we have a lot of firepower to sink all of them." Unsurprisingly, China has strongly opposed the move, and officials have warned that the deepening security alliance between Washington and Manila and their ongoing military drills should not interfere with territorial disputes. Ambassador Romualdez said in a telephone interview, quote, "We're under the gun. We don't have the wherewithal to be able to fight all this bullying coming from China, so where else will we go? We went to the right party, which is the United States, and those that believe in what the U.S. is doing." The U.S.-led 2024 Balikatan exercise marks the 39th iteration of the annual event. As stated by Mary Kay Carlson, the U.S. ambassador to the Philippines, these shoulder-to-shoulder operations are proof of the collective commitment to enhance interoperability, with the main objective of long-term peace and prosperity, not just for participating nations, but for the entire world. In early May, only a few days before the deliberate sinking of a Chinese-made vessel, defense chiefs from the United States, Australia, Japan, and the Philippines vowed to further deepen their cooperation. Meanwhile, regarding the drills, U.S. Marine Lieutenant General Michael Cederholm, part of the U.S. Exercise Joint Task Force, publicly stated that, quote, "It's no coincidence that as democratic nations, the values we share are enshrined in our respective national anthems. Those anthems talk about heroes, those that are brave, about defending freedom, and defending our respective shores from external attackers. I could not be prouder of the men and women in the field, the operational planning staffs, and all the enablers. They have truly made Balikatan 24 an incredible success."